Добро вечер. Ова е BookStar, фестивал на европската литература за 10-ти пат. Тимот на антологија оваа година, како јубилејна година, се погрижи да има интересни писатели. Овој фестивал низ годините, поминувајќи низ повеќе премрежија, успеа на еден или на друг начин да ги донесе најквалитетните писатели од европската почва, со надеж дека ќе прерасне уште во поголем фестивал, бидејќи програмата секоја година станува се побогата и поквалитетна. Првиот подкаст ќе биде со Жозе Луиш Пејшото, португалски прозаист, еден од најнаградуваните португалски писатели. До сега има објавено 13 прозни книги, 4 збирки поезија, патописи, па дури и книги за деца. Добитник е на многу национални награди, од кои што најважно е наградата Жозе Луиш, исто така еден од најпознатите португалски писатели. Едно од оние нешта поради кои што ми е драго што ќе разговарам со овој писател е тоа што има еден мултимедијален проект, би го нарекле, со познатата метал група Мунска. Тоа е, значи, збирката кратки раскази Против отров. И so now we will switch in English. This was just the introduction for the Macedonian audience. Welcome to our country. Hope that you will like the festival. Hope that you are enjoying today when this festival actually started. Your novel, the book Libre, книгата, it started with the scene of a mother leaving her son, Ilidio. And the whole scenery behind that gesture was a small town. It kind of reminded me of a little bit like Marquez. I don't like comparing it, but do you have some sort of love and influence from the magic realism in your books?
Well, in a certain way, I think that influence exists, but because of common realities. In fact, I feel that Portuguese reality, namely the one of rural interior areas, has some connections, incredibly, with South America. Maybe because of this kind of how can I put it? This mythology that exists in rurality and that has this fantasy attached to it, but also because there are historical connections. I mean, Portugal, of course, has a strong connection with Brazil. But the connection that exists regarding the Iberian Peninsula with South America is historical, is part of history. I feel sometimes, and I travel very frequently to South America, that we have some sort of understanding between these two different parts of the world that is sometimes difficult to explain, but that exists. It's clear. But regarding this this specific aspect of this novel, I feel that what's really strong there is this setting of rural Portugal, which to me it's very dear, because I was born in a village of about 1,000 people in rural Portugal, a village that is very similar to the one described there. And after I left, when I was 18 and went to Lisbon to study in the university, then I realized that a lot of that world was really special and that a lot of it had that kind of fantasy and literary vibe that maybe leads you to think of magical realism.
Because the place and the time, it's somehow like a mythical time and space, so you cannot, let's say, rely on some historical background. No, this happened in the exactly year. So everything is so, it can be somewhere in the past, but also it can be, I don't know, yesterday, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Even though there are remarks, this happened in 1969, this happened, but somehow the whole scenery there, it can be anytime. That's why I think it's somehow universal.
Well, it's very interesting, that remark, because this novel, it deals with a very specific aspect of Portuguese history, and that's why the years are there, the 60s, then a little bit of the 70s, and that specific historical event was the Portuguese immigration towards France, which was very big. In about 15 years, 1.5 million Portuguese went to France.
Any special reason for that?
The reason for that was that during the 60s, Portugal was going through a very difficult moment. There was the dictatorship that started in the 20s, and in that period, Portugal was involved in 3 wars in Africa, in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea. And the economical situation of the country was very difficult also, and so most of those people, they moved to France, which was building itself back after World War II, and was was receiving people to work on that reconstruction of the country. And
did they have to do it illegally, or it was just like, let's say,
no,
just financially? You just pass the border and you don't return, because in this let's say Eastern Bloc, like behind the Iron Curtain, most of the refugees, they had to do it illegally.
Yeah, and in Portugal it was also like that. Most of the people had to go cross the borders by foot in the middle of the night, illegally, and that story touched the life of many people in Portugal, of course, and me, even though I was born in 1974, which was the year of Portuguese Revolution, actually the end of dictatorship and the end of those wars. I was even touched by this story myself, because my parents went to France in that period. But as you said, and I was very happy to hear that, there is this kind of timeless vibe, because of course the subject of immigration is still a very contemporary subject, and literature also has this ambition of speaking of subjects that keep on being relevant. And one of my ambitions was to speak about Portuguese immigration towards France, but in a certain way to bring some questions of immigration in general in any part of the world.
This is not just an ordinary prose, because it has a lot of poetry in it. Do you consider yourself as a poet somehow, or is just, let's say, some sort of a hybrid? Because while reading, I kind of had the feeling that what I'm reading is like a novel with a lot of spice of poetry inside, making a lot of the sentences a little bit difficult to understand, and you have to return to go back and forth in order to understand, and somehow they give a different atmosphere inside. Did you do it intentionally, or is just something like I don't know.
Natural.
Yeah, natural.
I feel that it was not completely intentional. This was, I believe, my fourth novel, and actually, to be honest, my novels, starting from the first one, they have evolved towards a work of language that is less and less poetic. In the sense, the first ones would be even more related to poetry and to poetic language, and I feel that maybe that has something to do with Portuguese literary tradition. In Portugal, poetry is still today very important. Of course, names in Portuguese poetry that have touched all contemporary authors. I may refer, for example, Fernando Pessoa, of course, like an author that it's impossible to ignore. If you write in Portuguese, you cannot ignore his work, and his work is extremely poetic, and it has a lot of work in terms of the way he deals with language. But
which one of his alter egos? Like all of them?
all of them, all of them. But even if you look at most known Portuguese novelists, almost all of them have written poetry. I myself, I have published 4 poetry books. It's very difficult to resist the temptation of poetry in Portugal, and I feel that in terms of style, you have to be like true to the voice that you are able to do at that specific moment. Because if you force it, then you will not be able to last a whole novel. And at the time when I wrote this novel, this was the writing that I was doing, and even today, a few years have passed since I wrote it. I feel that there are a lot of important things that I developed at this time with this novel.
But you don't consider the poetry as a child disease of the literature, because
no, not at all, not at all.
Because a lot of the great novelists, they started with poetry, but somehow they, after several years or I don't know, like decades, they say like, no, these were like my beginnings, my true voices in this and this novel. So. Yeah. Not all of the writers can say, okay, this is my first novel, second novel, but now I'm going to switch at least one book with poetry and then I'm going to return to novels. Usually they all started with poetry, but somehow not everyone is capable of staying just strictly to be some sort of an elitist, because somehow poets think that they are like the elitistic part of the literature.
And they have some reasons to think that way, because in poetry there is this work, very detailed, of language, of the words. In a certain way, I feel that poetry condensates what's most important in literature. So I feel that this transition from poetry to prose is not always an evolution. Sometimes you progress, but in a certain aspects you go back.
Yeah, so it's like a decadence.
I mean, when I was a teenager, the first writings that I ever did with literary intention were poems. And at the time, of course, I was, like most teenagers, discovering the world, discovering myself, discovering language, and poetry was incredibly convenient to fulfill that purpose. Today, I can understand that people that feel a bit like embarrassed about the poetry they used to write, because in poetry you have to put yourself there, in a way that can be a bit difficult, in terms of judgments that might come from other people, and I don't mean like literary judgment, but personal judgment.
Yeah, because if you're more in.
It depends on the poetry that you're writing, but if it's personal, then that level can be a bit difficult to endure. But I feel that that poetry itself can be many things, and in terms of language, it can have an endless number of forms. And personally, sometimes I regret that I don't write as much poetry as I used to write, and that I don't have this easiness of writing a poem as I used to have, and I feel that I went backwards on that. At that time, I was probably more evolved than I am today.
Mm-hmm. Is it too much literature, too much reading that now kind of
it might be
close the door of the poetry, because you want to make it, let's say, more pure or maybe more even complex?
Personally, for me, sometimes I feel that I'm not at ease as I was with certain words. Mm-hmm. For example, when I first started writing and when I first started publishing, I published my first books in the year 2000. I was 25 at that time, and I published a poetry book in 2001. And for example, at that time, I would write much more in a way that was much easier than it is today. Words like love. Mm-hmm. Oh, I would use love very easily, you know, I wouldn't think, you know, it was just a word. And today, my God, I don't know if any of my last novels has used that word, for example. But as I said, I don't see it as an evolution. Sometimes I regret it.
There is a connection again with the poetry, but this time through your short stories from the Antidote.
Yes.
One of the things that really made me happy that we are going to have this podcast is because Muspel is one of my favorite metal bands, and whenever you find someone who is also part of that brotherhood of the metal music, it's somehow interesting to see where the ideas came from. I just thought that Fernando, the lead singer, is actually the mastermind behind all the lyrics, but now we can see that there was another Wizard of Oz behind the curtains somehow. Because everyone can be a fan of Metallica, of Iron Maiden. It's like a beer, but those fans who are listening to Muspel, a very famous Portuguese metal band, gothic, esoteric, occult, maybe a little bit metal band. The Muspel fans are those who know a good wine, if I can compare it like that. How did this idea with Fernando, how did it all started? And could you tell me if a reader of Antidote should listen to the Muspel songs at the same time while reading, or maybe first go through your short stories and then listen to the album Antidote? Because my personal favorite, Everything Invaded and From the Lowering Skies, is just a thing that is always like headbanger for most of the time.
Well, it's incredible because I hope it's okay to say that we are speaking on the 30th of September, and today, actually yesterday, it was 21 years since Antidote was published. It was on the
like anniversary.
29th September 2003.
Mm-hmm.
That was when that book and record were published. And at the time, I was publishing my first books. I had published one novel, one small prose book, and one poetry book at the time. Actually, I had published two novels, now that I'm remembering a bit better. And Moonspell was only their sixth album. But they were already very big and important. And I have always been a fan of metal. Even when I was in the small village where I was born, I was already listening to metal there. Actually, I feel that I have this aptitude towards metal. It's difficult to explain for me. I have this, it touches my sensitivity, the intensity of metal, like here using this word metal for a huge number of different things.
Varieties,
but still. And then there is another aspect that also helped this connection, and regarding Fernando, it's the fact that we are only 9 days apart in terms of age. Fernando is 9 days older than me. So we are the exact same generation. Fernando
you look more younger, maybe all the time on the road, and too much rock and roll made him a little bit...
But Fernando was growing up in the suburbs of Lisbon, actually in an area that is considered a bit rough. And I was growing up in the rural Portugal. But we, without knowing each other, we were sharing, a lot of bands. For example, Battery, Typo Negative, a lot of bands that Paradise Lost, a lot of bands that were happening at that time, Obituary, and then of course Iron Maiden, etc., etc., etc. And then when we first met. I had already, of course, I was listening to Moonspell since the 90s. He had heard of me and he had read one of my books at the time. And he was actually presenting a poetry book of himself at that time.
He's a poet also.
And I was there and we met and we, of course, had a lot of things in common to talk about. And from there started, creating a friendship that only a few weeks after we met came up with this idea. What if we did a record and a book that are connected and like kind of entwined? And at the time they had already about, I believe, 4 primitive drafts of 4 tracks that would later be part of that album. And at that period I started being part of their rehearsals, and I started being with them as they were composing that record. I started writing the stories and showing them, and it was something that was a bit back and forth. The stories, the music, and that ended in a moment that was incredibly special for me, when they recorded the record in Finland, in Helsinki, and we shared all kinds of adventures till that 29th of September 2003, when it finally came out. And it was very interesting for us at the time because, of course, in the book world there were a lot of prejudices regarding the metal world, and in the metal world there were some prejudices also regarding the book world. And for us at the time, we were very happy to, crash a bit of those prejudices, and we did things that were really nice. I remember, for example, doing the first part of the show in which they presented that record in Lisbon, in a very classic showroom there in Lisbon, and it was incredible to do a reading with them performing certain sound, environment in the back for, I don't know, about 5,000 people were expecting like a metal show. This was all previous to YouTube, so there are no recordings of that except like a bootleg or two. Just that people that recorded with a recorder there in the crowd.
Maybe for the 25th year you can do something like
maybe
anniversary album. It would be really, really, really nice.
Last year it was the 20th year. Moonspell did a vinyl, special edition vinyl, and my Portuguese publisher also did a special edition of that book with art cover and all very special. But I mean, still today, it's something that we are very proud of, and hopefully, we have always planned of doing something more, but not yet. Actually, it's interesting that we are here doing a podcast because both me and Fernando completed 50 years. He completed in August, and me 9 days later in September. And this year we did a series of talks online that like the one we are doing right now, and they're available on YouTube. And each month we discussed like a theme that we considered like very important in our life. So we discussed like music, literature, family, traveling, eight themes. We called it Antes de fazermos 50, which means before we turn 50.
No.
But now we're 50, so we're done with the podcast.
Metal fellows never get old.
No, well, it's interesting to see how metal has evolved with musicians getting older. And of course today metal is extremely different from what it was back in the days when we started listening to metal. In Portugal in late 80s, early 90s, we would have little access to metal. There was like one or two radio shows that we would listen religiously. Everybody was there, like prepared to record every song that they passed on the
hoping
show.
there won't be any ads during the
But and then there was like the underground and all that, and today we are living in this age of Spotify and different times, different realities also.
I hope that you will make another album with Fernando and Moonspell, because this is the best thing that really shocked me. Previously, just Terion, a metal band from Sweden, they create the music. They have a special person outside of the band who writes the lyrics, always connected with the mythology, with Kabbalah, and something that really needs a lot of
research
and literature background in order to understand. And then the other one is also one of my favorite, Amorphis from Finland, who they take text from the Kalevala. Is there such a book in Portuguese folklore that can be a treasure for a lot of authors, not necessarily musicians? Is there like a really folklore? Because whenever we say Portuguese music, we think of fado music.
Yeah. Well, let me just add you that in that specific record by Moonspell, The Antidote, the bass was played by Nicholas from
Amorphis. from Amorphis.
And they recorded it in Helsinki. But in Portugal, there is a book that is probably the national book that we all consider, unanimously as the national book, and it's called Os Lusíadas. Probably in English would be something like the Lusíadas, which actually could be translated as the Portuguese. And it was written in the 16th century by our national poet called Luís de Camões. The Portuguese National Day is the day of the birth of that poet, Luís de Camões, and it's like an epic book about the traveling that the Portuguese did, namely the one Vasco da Gama did towards India.
Yes.
And so it's the heroic deeds of Portuguese, and that has inspired a lot of musicians and a lot of artists throughout the years. Moonspell is a band that has a lot of connection with literature. They have, for example, one of their most famous songs called Opium,
Yes.
as a stanza by Fernando Pessoa, Alfred Campos, the name of his heteronym. They did a very interesting album recently called, I think, in English, 1755.
Yeah, for
And
the earthquake.
The earthquake that destroyed Lisbon. It was in that year, and that's the name of the album. And but I don't think they have done anything with Luís de Camões, but Luís de Camões is very important. And for example, in terms of fado, we have a very important singer that has passed away called Amália, and she did a revolution on fado by bringing the biggest poets into fado. She started singing those big poets, and one of them was Luís de Camões.
One of the jazz festivals, I think that Madre Deus were
Madre
like
Deus.
twice in,
Yeah.
once or twice, I cannot recall.
Yeah, Madre Deus also very important. I mean, now they're no longer active, but their music is very connected with fado. And Moonspell did a cover by Madre Deus called Senhores da Guerra, Warlords.
Somehow everything connects with the
everything
Moonspell.
is
Yeah.
connected.
Can a writer be a sellout? Usually for the bands, they say, "Oh, come on, they're a sellout." And I have never heard somebody say that about an author. Like everybody is okay if a person that writes gets paid because of his work, even if he kind of changes his style throughout.
I mean, I feel that we can see writers as sellouts, but not in the sense that they actually they were actually sold for money, because there is not much money in writing and literature. If you want to be rich, then maybe you should choose something else instead of writing, because that's not where you'll get a lot of money. But
you could be a professional author in Portugal.
I've been living out of writing, even though lately I've been doing some other jobs also. But I have always considered. I never lived exclusively out of books. I've written all kinds of different projects. I have worked with theater. I have worked with. I've done a lot of writing in magazines and newspapers, because in Portugal there is this tradition. I don't know if it's the same here, of writers writing this genre that we call crónicas, which is like columns.
Columns, yeah.
Which can be more or less political. Sometimes some of them are really political and about social issues. Some others less. It depends. Me, I've written a bit of both. After 2008, I also started writing a lot about traveling, because at the time I started collaborating with two magazines, one in Portugal and one in Brazil, related to traveling. That took me to write a book that is actually published here in Macedonia. about North Korea. I don't know if you heard about that one. It was published here by Ars Lamina, publisher in 2017. And I've also written then another book about Thailand, which for me opened a door in a certain way, because I had written so much about my origins, the things that were close to me, that I felt this interest of writing about things that are extremely away and extremely far.
But it's like a first-hand experience. I mean, you can go to Thailand, but to North Korea also?
I've been 5 times in North Korea.
Wow!
And I wrote that book, which in English would be called Inside the Secret. I don't know what would be the title in Macedonia.
Whoa, it's so is it like we are seeing on all those documentaries on YouTube about North Korea, or it's mainly like myths and not fact-checking? Like, oh, in North Korea you can only have 8 type of haircut for men and maybe 12 for women. Then you have like speaker in every home, and every day the president, the father of the nation, Kim Jong-un is talking, and you are prohibited of watching Western movies, just Chinese movies, and there also some of them are prohibited. Is that true, or mainly we are having a false...
I'm coming from literature, so that's my approach. Even though these books are non-fiction, they are based on my experience. They come from this literary perspective, and the literary perspective, as I see it, always focuses on how things are complex, how things are not just one side. There is always several sides to one issue. And regarding North Korea, of course there are a number of things that are extremely how can I say, strange and provocative and different to us, namely the fact that we are talking about a country that is completely isolated from the world, in a time in which we are all we are like overloaded with information. They have no information except the official information that they receive. Also, that aspect of cult of personality is extreme, and it's very important. Also, the fact that they don't have private property as we know it, that everything is totally, almost 100% state run, but people are people, you know, and people, women, men, children, they are women, men, and children. Even though they have this regime, which is completely different and unique and hard and cruel, but also we have to consider that they have a completely different civilizational route. They have a view on things that, on that deep aspect, is also very different from us. And so, for me to experience that culture and that country and that society, I have to say that I don't have final answers to most of the questions that everybody tries to answer, because a lot of things are still a mystery. But in a certain way, I feel that North Korea poses this question that is, very common and that we deal with it very often, which is the other. Someone that we consider extremely different from us. Also, this idea of, actually we can even see the question of tourism there, because when you visit North Korea as a foreigner, they make up a show for you. They take you to places that those are the places allowed. So they create a world for you. And that can also be a bit of a metaphor for tourism, you know, anywhere in a certain way. Tourism is an economical activity that profits from selling like an experience, the experience of a little world. And so...
But that's the same thing, even if you go, let's say there are some offers to go to Tunisia, to go to Zanzibar, but they say like you cannot leave the camp. If you leave the camp, you might get, I don't know, robbed, raped, mugged, even killed. So, I don't know, Zanzibar, if I stay in my hotel and the beach and everything is okay, but if I want to check outside, I mean, you haven't traveled into a part of the world if you don't get lost in the place. But you cannot do it in some of the countries.
But then if you are in that compound, then you will have people that will go there and they will show you like traditional dances. And they'll tell you, these are the traditional dances of Zanzibar. And you accept it or not, you know? It depends on you. But it's, and in a certain way I compare that with North Korea. Of course it's very different. You know, there are political reasons, there are a number of things, but I feel that there are a lot of questions that we may reflect upon based on this North Korean experience, which is extremely extravagant, which is extremely, you know, different, but it's much more complex than sometimes we are willing to acknowledge when we just take it, you know, superficially.
Do you often go as a writer in residence somewhere? Do you have your workshops?
I did that a few times in a few places.
Does it help with your writing, or
well,
it just gives you the time? You don't take a lot of influence from the place that you are. I mean, if they put you in Estonia for 1 month as a writer in residence, is your work going to get a little bit of Estonian salt, if I may say?
I've always
or
been
North Korean or whatever.
I've always been a bit chaotic in that sense, and I have never been afraid of influences. You know, I meet a lot of writers that I've heard that stop reading while they are writing because they don't want the reading that they do to go into the writing. But I never did that. I'm always, you know, interested in getting influences. I never stop reading, you know, I'm always open. But regarding those experiences of writing residencies, I have different experiences. The first one that I ever did was in early 2000s. I was invited for a residency in United States, in upstate New York. And I had never been in the United States at that time. And they invited me to be there for 2 months. So I accepted it. I was euphoric with the invitation. I did not write anything, you know. I was just
the vacation,
experiencing the place and all that. Of course, at that time I was on my 20s and I was a bit irresponsible, maybe. Also, probably, you know, I wasn't able to control my writing in the way that I did later on, and to have like strategies to, you know, to manage my writing. Afterwards, I had other experiences that were much more profitable in terms of writing, in which I really used the time to write. Like recently, I was, for example, in Timișoara in Romania, and I spent a month there and I wrote a lot. You know, it depends, because regarding writing, you have to be able to do that very subjective management of time and energy and this flow of words that it's not obvious. I feel that, at least in my case, with time I developed a better knowledge of how to manage my ability to write. Before I was much more wild in terms of the way it came.
More explorer than.
Yeah, but also as we were saying before regarding poetry, I feel that with time you get some things, you evolve, but also you lose some things, and you have to accept it, because that's how it works. Some things you get better at some things, and you sometimes lose your end on some other things.
This was a really fruitful discussion. I really liked it. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you.
And I hope that you will have another opportunity in front of broad audience here.
Thank you.
To share some of your things, secrets.
Thank you.
For the future writers, translators, and anybody who is interested in this. It's really interesting how nobody mentioned previously the Moonspell part of your work, also with the North Korea and everything. But it seems that I don't think that this is the last time that you are going to be a guest here in our country.
No, I hope not. I hope to come back.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.